Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is Carrie Thomas from the Chicago Jobs Council, and I'm co-hosting today's webinar with Mary Kay Devine of Women Employed. We also have Dana Castillo from Women Employed here managing the technology. So it's our pleasure to welcome you to today's meeting of the Pathways to Careers Network. And before we dive into the webinar, I'm going to review some housekeeping items with you. So during the presentation, your phone lines will be muted. And we do have a full agenda today and presentation, but we have provided a few options for questions. So there will be plenty of time for questions. I want you to notice that the chat window in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen will be open throughout the webinar. So if during the webinar you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat window for them, and we'll have those when it comes to the Q&A. You can continue, when we get to the Q&A, you can also use that chat feature and just ask the questions via chat, or we're going to ask folks to raise their hand so that we can have people speak over the phone as well. And during the webinar, you'll have an opportunity to share your thoughts with a couple of polling questions. We usually do that. And at the end of the webinar, there may be a short survey, but the polling questions are the most important. So as you heard when you entered, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to that recording so that you can access the full webinar after today if you want to re-listen to any portion. If you need any technical assistance, we encourage you to contact ReadyTalk directly. Their number is 1-800-843-9166, and in our experience, they are very responsive and very helpful. So again, their number is 1-800-843-9166. Okay, so I'd like to review the objectives for today's webinar. Good for students, good for colleges, and we have 3 objectives. We want to discuss how investing bridge programs can support student success and help colleges generate returns on their investment. We want to provide you with access to the companion worksheets to calculate your own college's potential return on investment for bridge programs. And we want to give you a chance to learn about additional resources that can help you make the case to invest in bridge programs for your students. I also want to point out and acknowledge that we are very lucky to have several individuals on the line from across the country, as well as in Chicago and Illinois, who have worked on bridge programs and other transition type programs for many years, and they will likely have a lot to add to today's discussion, so we really look forward to the discussion and Q&A. So again, we're going to open the lines a few times during the webinar. So for those of you who have been working in this area for a number of years, we really would appreciate if you'd contribute during that portion of the webinar. So as always, we like to open our webinars by grounding the conversation in our Illinois' urgent need to improve adult transitions into college and post-secondary and careers. So by 2020, about 67% of Illinois jobs will require a college degree or certificate. Yet about 3 million Illinois adults do not have any education beyond high school. And as a result of this skills gap, out of 100 future jobs, 24 could go unfilled. So to address this skills gap, Women Employed and the Chicago Jobs Council launched the Pathways to Careers Network in 2012 in order to promote the increase of college and career success for adult learners who have low basic skills. We inform, we connect, we advocate, and the Pathways to Careers Network advances the mission of both of our organizations. So as many of you know, for over 40 years, Women Employed has been mobilizing people and organizations to expand educational employment opportunities for America's working women. And for just about 35 years now, the Chicago Jobs Council has worked with its members to ensure access to employment and career advancement for people living in poverty. So our first poll, for those of you who've been on a webinar before, is we want to get a sense of your membership in the Pathways to Careers Network. So if you're not a member, we want you to sign up. If you're already on the list, let us know. Or if you want to learn more, let us know if you want us to contact you. So as you can tell, No matter what your response, we will find a way to connect to you. So we'll leave this open for a few more seconds or so. Don't forget to give your answer. More seconds. Okay, we'll close the poll. All right, most of you are already on our list. Doesn't surprise me. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Kay Devine.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's Pathways to Careers Network webinar. So we want to set the context on this recent brief that we released. Good for students, good for colleges, investing in bridge programs as a strategy for success. So as many people on the line already know, that community colleges are truly at a crossroads. Pressure is mounting to increase the number of students earning degrees and improving student retention rates. And many of us, and here in Illinois the conversation has been prevalent about the movement to seek funding for colleges based on performance measures and performance outcomes. A couple of the facts that we pulled on this sheet, the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center had reported enrollments in colleges across the country declining for 7 consecutive semesters through the last semester in spring 2015. And when we pulled the state level reports from the Illinois Community College Board, we saw similar declining enrollments here in the state. So consequently, colleges need to find new pools of students to recruit from, and they also need to make sure that these students can succeed by persisting through college and successfully completing certificate and degree programs. So, as many folks who are familiar with Women Employed know, we really focus on the adult learners, and that's really, who's best served by the bridge model. So on this slide, we're looking at both the national context, and those are sort of the people at the top, the fact that we have 24 million Americans who lack a high school degree, and 13 million American adults have difficulty speaking English. For folks, the second graphic on this slide, we released a brief going back to 2012 when our state leaders first announced their interest in expanding, that 60% of Illinois adults would have a credential or college degree by the year 2025. And that used to seem like a long time ago, but now we're just about a decade out. And so a strong case that we've consistently made is to our state leaders and our college leaders, let's pay attention to the adults we have right now today in Illinois. So the smaller blue bubble that you see, we pulled stats from the Illinois State Board of Education, the K-12 program, and their projected estimate for students who are on track to graduate from high school was about this number, 1.8 million plus. And that's at 100% graduation rate. So as we said, if we had 100% of traditional age students graduating from high school from 2013 when we first pulled the numbers all the way through to 2025, we're on track for about 1.8 million students to be in that pipeline. And yet today, on October 29th, 2015, we have more than 3 million working age adults who don't have a college degree. We pulled that information from the American Community Survey data, so that's sort of a subset of data that we get from the Census Bureau and combined by the Working Poor Families Project. So this is really the context. We know the national landscape, and to bring the conversation local here for Illinois, right now 3 million adults who don't have a college degree, who are many of whom are currently in the workforce and represent the future workforce. So in this brief, we double down on that case, and we really want to engage with college leaders and say, you're at this intersection, you're facing pressure on declining enrollments. Clearly Illinois is in a budget crisis, no matter how many leaders want us to soften the blow and call it an impasse. We are truly in a budget crisis, and funding is at stake and declining. So we're trying to engage with college leaders across Illinois and the nation and say, in this environment, you don't need to post another radio ad. You don't need to put another flyer in the local paper or, put up flyers at community centers. You have a large pool of potential students in adult education classes already on your campus. And really trying to shift the perspective of college leaders to think of these students as potential future college students. I have a poll for folks. When I'm in the room and we do these workshops on the road, I ask people to raise their hands. And so since I can't see you all raising your hands, this is a multiple response, multiple answer poll. So select as many responses that apply to you. So if you work on a college campus, do you work in adult education? Have you observed empty seats in college classes? Like on the last slide, we had a few open seats in that Math 211 class, and you had a full group of students in that adult education program. For this one, do you know adults who could benefit with Bridge? And especially since I'm on the line with many educators, I want to explain that contraction because I'm only allowed 35 characters in my poll responses. So we kind of had to be like, who'd benefit from Bridge? So I appreciate your patience with me, as it's like worse than Twitter, 35 characters. And then I'm also interested to know from people on the line, and I realize we've got advocates and researchers and policy experts, so maybe you don't run a program and it doesn't fit, but if you do, please participate in this poll because we're really curious how many of you are already recruiting from adult education and treating adult education students like future college students. So I'm just going to leave this poll open for another second, and as it applies to you, if it applies to you particularly, we ask that you respond. All right, a couple more folks coming in. I appreciate people's responses. Okay. I'm going to close the poll. So here's who we've got today. So clearly, adult education is well represented. Thanks for your participation today. There are definitely a few of you who are observing empty seats. I think interesting to note the large number of adult educators on the line, and clearly, not everyone is working directly on a college campus. I like to see the high number of folks who acknowledge they know adults in their world who could benefit from the Bridge model, and positive, that given the number of folks who responded, almost half say that they're already recruiting from adult education and treating those students as potential future college students. Thanks, everybody. So one of the other elements that we put forth in this case for investing in Bridge programs as a strategy for success is the importance of visionary leaders. Far too often, adult education students are invisible at the post-secondary level, and there are many factors that lead to this reality. In some cases, adult education is managed by a separate administration within a college, or by a completely different entity like the K through 12 system. I know in Illinois from my time in the field, we've got the regional offices of education, the K through 12. I know we've got adult education programming happening in our prisons. The Department of Corrections oversees that. So there's a lot of different places where adult ed is happening, and we're really trying to connect that conversation, that's happening on the college campuses. What we've also observed is that even when adult education administrators design and promote transition programs, far too often the college system isn't prepared to receive them. So a combination of leadership, vision, and institutional support is essential to increasing the rate of transition from adult education programs to college. And as you see on this slide, we feel very strongly the vision must be inclusive. A vision where progress of adult education students is woven into the goals of the college system as a whole. A vision where progress is measured and reported publicly, and we'll say more about that as the webinar continues, and includes the data on adult education students' transition into and the completion of post-secondary education programs. And equally as importantly, a vision where college leaders invest resources to ensure that this vision becomes reality. So speaking of visionary leaders, it's my honor today to be sitting here with Samir Gadkaree. He was the author of this brief and our partner in publishing the business case for bridge programs. He currently is working as an education and workforce development consultant, and as many of you know, he formerly was the Associate Vice Chancellor for Adult Education at City Colleges. He oversaw adult basic education, adult secondary education, and English as a second language programs for 6 colleges and 30,000 students. In the role, Samir also oversaw the expansion of transition programs, including the creation of new occupational bridge programs and the expansion of the Gateway to City Colleges of Chicago program. It's an academic incentive program that runs across the system, and Samir will be sharing more about that. So, with further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Samir. Thanks for being here with us today.
All right, thanks Mary Kay, and thanks everyone for joining us. It was nice to see some familiar names as we were looking at the folks on the webinar. Of course, most of you know, but I'll just recap briefly that several years ago, I think it's 5 years ago, the Chancellor Cheryl Hyman came to City Colleges and launched an effort called Reinvention to focus the institution on outcomes. And I had the pleasure of working under Chancellor Hyman when I was running adult education. When establishing this effort to refocus City Colleges on outcomes, the Chancellor established 4 goals. The first one is to increase the number of students earning college credentials of economic value. The second is to increase the rate of transfer to bachelor's degree programs following CCC graduation. The third is to drastically improve outcomes for students requiring remediation. And the fourth is to increase the number and share of adult education students who advance to and succeed in college-level courses. I won't go into all of the numbers here, but suffice it to say that the graduation rates have more than doubled. Degree attainment is up markedly. And on the adult education transition goal, the rate was up 50% when I left and continued to increase under my successor, Ann Darton, who's also on the line. So we're happy to talk about any of those numbers, but let me move on to discuss adult education in a little bit more detail. When we think about transitioning students from adult education to college, we really are thinking about taking this pool of students who many of you know and work with on a day-to-day basis, the majority of whom we know have low income. Although they're working jobs, they're working in jobs that don't pay very good wages. And the majority of them are thinking of education as a way to improve their economic circumstances. And that's really the fundamental insight that drives us towards these transition programs. Ultimately, we know that based on the statistics on unemployment and on wages, without getting these individuals, these adults, a college-level credential of some kind, it's going to be very hard for them to improve their economic circumstance. And that's the underlying genesis of the programs we're going to be talking about today. The bridge programs, many of you are, of course, familiar with, as we saw in the poll, but they look to move students to an occupational college-level credential, and we're happy to answer any questions you have about that, but I suspect most of you are familiar with those programs. There are also programs that dual enroll students in adult education and college credit, and both Ann and I, in our time at City Colleges, worked to kind of blend students across these multiple programs in order to help them go to college at reduced cost. And so, we basically see this model that builds a bridge for students from adult education into college and helps them take some college-level classes while they're still in adult education. And that's really the model that we're going to be talking about in terms of numbers. We're going to go into the numbers in excruciating detail, and we'll have a number of moments when you can ask questions about it, because I know that throwing a lot of numbers at you, it doesn't make sense unless we have a chance to talk about it. But in the numbers that you're going to see today, what we wanted to do was show that these programs, which we think are morally the right thing to do, which we think will help adults get to a goal that they ought to have, and oftentimes, in our experience, are very well positioned to attain. We also think that these programs deliver a financial benefit to community colleges that adopt them, and that financial benefit takes the form of incremental tuition revenue and state reimbursements above and beyond the investments that colleges need to make in getting these students to the front door of the college level class.
Okay, so we're just going to take a quick second and leave this slide up with the website. So since you've logged on to the webinar using your internet browser, you can just take a second if you'd like and either minimize the webinar or just shrink the window for a second. Visit womenemployed.org/investing in bridge programs, and you'll see a thumbnail with the worksheet. You don't have to do that right now, but you might like to. Samir's going to walk through. It's a two-sided worksheet, pre-populated with sample numbers from the Chicagoland area. And then there's a blank version that we would encourage you to use with your local programs to make your local case. So if you visit womenemployed.org, investing in bridge programs, you'll be able to access the Investment and Returns Worksheet. And like I said, altogether it's a 4-page file. The first 2 will be the samples from the Chicagoland numbers, and Samir will walk us through those in a minute. And then the next are blanks. And as you see on most of the slides throughout, we'll have the URL. So if you don't download it right this minute, you'll have an opportunity to do so later. And like I said in the chat window, Samir will continue talking through some of these details, and we definitely ask, quote, raise your hand. We'll be able to see that you have a question, and when we break for questions in a moment, Carrie will know that you're interested to make a comment or ask a question, or submit a comment or question to the chat box, and then we'll give you instructions on how to unmute your line. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Samir.
Perfect. Thank you, Mary Kay. And before we get into the numbers, I just want to say that our main goal here is to help you construct the case for your students, for the colleges that you work with or the colleges that you're at. And that's the genesis for this. But I'll talk you through the pieces of the calculation, and then we'll pause for questions. The first piece, if we think about the costs of transitioning a student over to college, the first piece of that is on the first page. And on the first page, what we're capturing is the fact that these programs typically have lower class sizes than other programs at your college in terms of the adult education instructors. So what we captured on this first page is the cost of that lower class size. If there's a class of 30 students and it runs twice a year, you might be serving 60 students in that one classroom. But in a bridge classroom, you might have a class size of 24. So over the 2 semesters, that would be 48 students. And what you see us doing here is taking the class hours for a typical bridge program, multiplying that by the instructor's wages per hour, so A times B, and then dividing that by each the traditional class size and the bridge class size. And that's the difference that we're capturing on page 1. So again, this page is capturing the incremental class size difference of bridge programs. The second cost that we've found in running bridge programs is the cost of having some support personnel. Everyone calls them different things, but you might call them a transition specialist or a coach or something like that. What we did here is take the cost of salary and benefits and divide it by the number of bridge students that are being served by that individual per year. And there's a piece in here for the time allocation for those bridge specialists in recognition of the fact that at many colleges They're someone who's playing this role but isn't spending the majority or all of their time on transitioning adults. The third piece we have on the investment side is the cost of providing college classes to adults at no cost or at a reduced cost. And in this example, we're providing 3 college level credits for free at a cost of $100 per credit hour. So those are, in brief, the 3 costs. And why don't we pause and take questions about the investments in bridge programs. And again, the hope is to help you build this case for your college or your program. So please feel free to ask either about the numbers that you see here or about other costs that you're worried about.
So to ask questions, you have 2 options. One is you can raise your hand, and the second is that you can put a question in the chat box. So we do have one question in the chat box from Oswaldo Alvarez. How can the community-based programs offer bridge programs that are recognized by the community college as college-level courses? So I don't know, Samir, if this is something that you can answer. So this is different from the costs of bridge programs, or if there's anybody else on the line who can answer.
Sure, I'm happy to take a shot at it. And Oswaldo, good to see your name again.
And I just want to say also, Oswaldo, if you want to have a conversation with Samir, you can unmute your line by hitting *7, and then we just ask after your exchange that you would hit *6 to go back on mute so we avoid background noise. Are you on the line, Oswaldo? Well,
maybe I can take a shot at it, and then we can have a bit of conversation. So, Oswaldo, great question. The challenge oftentimes on the college side is the rules that they have based on accreditation and what those rules imply in terms of how they offer college classes. Certainly, a conversation that a college could have with a CBO, whether in Chicago or elsewhere, is about having a college-level class that's offered off-campus as part of a bridge program. But I would point out 2 or 3 things that we should think about in relation to that. The first one is, in offering a college-level class, it's going to be important for a CBO to think about what the number of students they could have in that class would be. So if we think about a class being offered at the community college itself, oftentimes the class size is going to be in the range of about 30 students. My guess would be that for many CBOs, that's going to be a pretty big class to find 30 students who are college ready in a given subject. But certainly that's not an insurmountable barrier. It's just something to keep in mind. And then the second thing is going to be about ensuring that the curriculum and the instructor are, meeting the accreditation requirements at the college level. So it's, again, something that likely could be worked out, but I think those are some of the big considerations that would probably come into play for almost any community college in the state.
Thank you, Samir. So Oswaldo, I don't know if you had a follow-up question to that if you're on the line. Okay. Are there any other questions about the first set of calculations related to investments in bridge students that happen at colleges and the different categories and how to calculate them?
I also wanted just to flag Judy Mortrude, who had been one of the leaders on bridge programs in Minnesota and is now at the Center of Law and Social Policy, one of our partner national organizations, had offered a resource about the CUNY, the City University of New York, and one of their accelerated programs making the case of the importance of initial investments. I don't know, Judy, do you want to unmute your line *7 and add any additional information or context to your post?
Well, while we're waiting for Judy, I'll just say that the CUNY ASAP model is a really great national model for DevEd. The investments they make in the quality of teaching and in helping the students persist have been shown to pay off by an MDRC study, and I think it looks like maybe the link is in the chat window. I definitely appreciate your bringing that up, Judy, in that I believe the case we're making here is very similar, that an investment in helping students get to college will ultimately pay off. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and it's *7, not #7. So let's just give her another second. We're trying to communicate.
Okay. I apologize.
Hi, Judy. Thanks for
got
joining
it.
us.
Thank you. Yes, that is exactly my point. So thanks for taking it that way. I just think that a lot of the argument against these kind of intervention strategies is that, oh gosh, they cost money. And they might. But, if you can get to dramatic completion gains, then you're really saving a lot of money in the end. So thanks for letting me share that.
Great.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
So we have another question in the chat window from Jim Torrance at the Insight Center, and I will read the question, but Jim, you can hit *7 if you want to be on the line as well. So Jim asks, what's the basis for the estimate that 500 students per year can be provided transition and support services by a single staff member? Am I reading that right?
So, Jim, a couple of thoughts. The first one is it's a question of scale, right? So if I think about city colleges, there were 30,000 adult education students, and when I left, I believe 1,200 or more per year transitioning. As we got to, if we think about what the number is now, I suspect it's more than that. The question is about how much does that person have to do, and how many bridge students are they supporting? So hopefully I'm explaining this in a way that makes sense. It may be the case that in a smaller program, there's someone who is 50% dedicated and supporting 100 students transitioning, and that could be a fairly similar proportion to city colleges. It could be the case that there's someone who has, 16 different responsibilities, as many of us do, but one of them is helping adults transition, and so they're spending a fraction of their time and helping students transition. I don't know, Jim, if you have more color you'd like to add to that, or Mary Kay, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Well, this is Jim. I'll just say that I appreciate that answer, and what I understand is that it's based on your experience at the City Colleges of Chicago, and it's based on a certain scale. And I appreciate that you also pointed to how it might be applied at a smaller scale, because those who are beginning this process will likely not have that kind of scale or may want to pilot something. And if you have any more advice for those who are just starting this process, it'd be helpful.
And thanks, Jim. And if I could ask a clarifying question, actually, on Samir, on this, could you give the definition for that, what transition services are at city colleges that person is responsible for? And the reason that I ask that is because Jim wrote transition and support services, and I think in many community-based organizations, the way those organizations think of that set of services might be broader than in a college setting. I don't know, so
Yeah, so, certainly one of the benefits of scale is allowing people to specialize, right? And so it could be the case, or is the case, that oftentimes in some of the bigger programs that the transition specialist can focus on students who are in the upper levels of adult education, talk to them about the benefits of college, talk to them about the financial aid process, talk to them about scholarship programs that exist, and various career paths they could take at the college level. Now, my guess is that oftentimes when we think about a program, an adult ed program that has very mixed level students, right? So some students who might just be learning basic English, some students who might be closer to the college level, that it's going to likely be a range of services that they're providing, just talking not only about educational paths, but also some of the things that help students persist in the program. And it's certainly the case that this model is built a little bit more on the former, in the sense that the numbers we're talking about here are really for a case where someone can specialize. But I would say that by looking at the percentages and the numbers in here, it's likely possible for a college to build a case for themselves. For CBO.
Well, thanks so much for all that information and for the clarifying question too, Mary Kay. And I love the business case that you're constructing, so this is very helpful. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And let us know if you have any follow-up questions as you're trying to make this case yourself.
You know, the one thing I wanted to offer is I think where we came to a point of decision to publish this type of brief, I mean, folks on the line know, Women Employed's been working on bridges since 2003. I literally just had a conversation with our Associate Director, Jenny Whitner. She says, I can clearly remember, I was in a meeting in 2003 with Whitney Smith from, formerly the Joyce Foundation, and learning about this model and thinking this is exactly the kind of models we need to start ramping up in Illinois. And, so for more than a decade, working on policies, working on programs, I know many of you have downloaded our lesson plans, our various resources, and we've worked really closely, with multiple state agencies trying to support the development and implementation of bridge programs. And, clearly we didn't have the crystal ball to know that we'd be releasing a business case talking about investments like as we're slamming into a budget crisis. But we actually think it's a very apropos time to have this conversation, because now more than ever, when we're facing scant resources, we do need to make tough decisions about how we're investing those resources. And, that's when we came to the decision, let's release the business case. I think Samir definitely said it. We've been making the moral case for many years that this is the right thing to do in helping students succeed. And now we're doubling down and saying, okay, well, let's put our money where our mouth is. Okay, as I was making my comment, I see another question came in, Carrie, from Tammy Yarbrough.
And I can't see the question, I'm afraid.
Hold on one second. Let's pull it up, Tammy.
Okay, so Tammy, if you want to speak, just hit *7, but I'll state your question here. We are just developing a bridge program for January next year, and we are having problems finding students. Are there any specific places we can recruit from?
So, Tammy, great question. There's a number of people online who might be better able to speak to this than I. Certainly, we have a few folks who are leaders in developing bridge programs and recruiting students. I think a good example is Instituto del Progreso Latino, which has been doing this for quite some time. But I'll take a shot at it anyway. So ultimately, what we were finding in our work, Ann and I and others at city colleges, is that this pool of adults oftentimes didn't believe they could be successful in college. If they were to believe that they could be successful in college, they would absolutely want to go because they knew that the college credentials would help them get better jobs, and that was ultimately the path to a better job. So in our work, the realization that we came to was that a large part of the work is about convincing students that they can be successful in college, and we found that there was no better way to do that than by having them take a college class with support in a supportive environment, with other adult education students, with a transition specialist who's working with them. And so I wonder whether, and I certainly do not know specifics of your situation, but I wonder whether part of the answer is in building that kind of supportive environment in which adults can take college classes and convincing them that they can be successful. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that sometimes, there are programs that are relatively small and are serving students at very different levels. And I know that in that environment, it can be harder to convince students that to transition to college, or it might be the case that, if one of you is working at a CBO that serves 45 or 50 students total, that it may be hard to construct a bridge class in that environment, knowing that you have a range of students in terms of their level of English proficiency or math proficiency. So certainly that's a consideration, but that would be my thought on it. And again, I would say that we certainly know people who are who have been doing this for many years. So I don't know if any of them want to chime in, but that's my first thought.
Thanks, Samir. I think the only thing I would add to that, and I think Samir alluded to this, is that there are several examples, at least in Chicagoland area, of community-based organizations that have developed relationships with colleges to kind of streamline that pathway. And one of those networks is the Allied Healthcare Career Network, and Jackie Somerville, who is the director of that network, just commented in the chat section that she has been working with her network to develop MOUs with city colleges. So I think that that's one of the ways to make sure that you can kind of streamline recruitment and make sure it's a successful process. And also, Ann Darton just added a little bit more that transition specialists at city colleges would often talk with new adult ed students who scored at bridge level to see whether, if offered the option, they'd be interested in joining. So that is another role of a dedicated staff person. A transition specialist is the title in the case of city colleges, but a dedicated person to help individuals kind of imagine themselves going into a college-based program. Another comment, and anybody can, if anybody's on the line who's hit *7 who wants to speak, I'm happy to not read these what's in the chat box. If anybody's on the line, go ahead.
Stacey Evans, if you want to, it's *7 to unmute your line. You're sharing experience with the program you ran.
Okay, so what Stacy commented was one of the things that worked for the program that she ran for several years was to start with the students. And they conducted a survey to find out what types of education and jobs students were interested in, and then developed the program to meet the majority need from that survey. So once they had the program, recruitment was pretty easy. And then one final question before we move on to the next section, again from Oswaldo. Oswaldo, do you want to hit *7 and ask your question? Okay, Oswaldo's question. Are colleges helping place participants into bridge-related jobs after completion of bridge, or are those programs mostly transitioning to higher-level courses? It's a good question.
Oh, hello.
So thank you, Oswaldo.
Yeah. Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay. And one of the reasons why I'm asking this question is because I'm also trying to figure out the funding sources. If funding sources should come more so from the education world, or if they should come from the workforce world. I mean, bridge programs seems to be combining both. But I'm just wondering, as agencies are thinking about bridge programs, where they can be fundraising from and stuff like that.
Yeah. So Oswaldo, great question. I wish I could tell you that I had a number, an exact number in mind. I don't. What I would say is that, unfortunately, I know this is the complication of mixing different funding streams. Both of those outcomes are a success in my mind, right? So if a student is persisting in college level classes, that's great. And if they are moving into an occupational job after earning a credential, that's great. Those two goals actually coexist for the first 15 credits or so at a community college, the first 5 classes usually. After that, there's probably some divergence in the paths, right? So there are some students who would take a 15 credits worth of classes and earn an occupational certificate. There are some students who would persist 30 or 60 credits and either get an advanced certificate or an associate's degree. In my mind, both would be a success. And as you are pointing out, there's a complication that they have some slightly different funding sources oftentimes. So I think that's certainly something that we need to keep in mind. I wish there was a better answer.
Yeah, Oswald, I think that's a great question, and I think it's really a good time to be looking closely at the components of these programs and which funding streams are the most appropriate for which portions of them, and especially in the context of partnerships that are delivering them. Partnerships is often between CBOs and colleges. So I think we're going to move on to the next section. So thanks everybody for your questions, and we will have another chance to ask questions. So Smear.
Yes, very soon, in fact. So let me talk a little bit about the returns to the college of having students transitioning. And I apologize, for these slides with lots of numbers on them, but I'll try to make sense of it. So ultimately, we're trying to calculate two different numbers here. The first number we're trying to calculate is what is the incremental tuition revenue for a given student for persistence in college. And of course, that requires us to take an estimate of how long they persist. The second is what's the incremental state reimbursement that they get for having more students. So this is really getting into the business side of community colleges in terms of what are their revenue sources. Usually there are three: tax levies, state reimbursements, and tuition revenue. So let me just talk about the first one, and then we'll talk about the second one. In the first one, we take what is the retention rate of students persisting from the bridge into their first semester of college classes, and how many classes are they taking. So in this calculation, we're saying students coming out of the bridge at a rate of 60% will stay for a semester, and those students will earn 6 credits in their first semester. We're then assuming that that drops off immediately to 15% of the students who persist to college completion, and that those college completers earn an average of 30 credits. That's kind of an average between a basic certificate and an associate's degree, so and happens to be roughly the right number of credits for an advanced certificate. So those are our assumptions for tuition revenue. First, that 60% of the students persist into their first semester of college. Second, that in that first semester of college, they're earning 6 college level credits. Third, that there's almost immediately a drop-off, which obviously is not realistic. There's almost immediately a drop-off to only 15% of the students who then go on to complete 30 credits. That 15% college completion rate is relatively low for most of the Chicagoland area, but we put it in there to keep things conservative. The second part of this is the state reimbursement rate. The state reimbursement rates are somewhat complicated. Every state is very, very different, but we took an average number to keep things realistic and used an average reimbursement of $35 per credit hour. So that's how we arrived at the second piece of this. So with that, you can see how we got to our total investment and total return numbers. And why don't we go again to questions?
So I just wanted, before we open up the lines or folks can put in their chats, if you've seen the worksheet or you downloaded it, I know it's a little small to see on the slides, we footnote various calculations so that you'd know what the source would be. So for example, the sample that has the pre-populated numbers, we walk people through the calculations, and we really appreciated feedback. Samir was the lead author, and then we did some field testing with partners literally across the state, northernmost colleges, southernmost colleges, and right in the middle for good measure. And we initially had thought of doing a more interactive type thing on the web, and folks said, no, I don't want underlying assumptions. I want real numbers that I could present to my administration, my board, my trustees. So when you have the opportunity to download the tool, you'll see we supply you with the Illinois Bridge definition to help you make sure that the calculations in the case you're making are grounded in the current definition. We clarify that these numbers are based on Chicagoland costs and revenues and acknowledge based on geography and program that your numbers will run the gamut. And then we specifically, to Samir's point, link to the Illinois Community College Board operating budget and appropriation document and take you right to the exact page number you could look up. And on this slide, this was something that people also asked us to supply to them, is, you know, what would be the number of credits earned for a basic, advanced, and associate. So we really tried to supply those numbers. And I just want to go back, Samir, for 1 second, because I've received the question from the field. The field that says 60%, so that's your retention rate. That's what the adult ed administrator would have access to for data and say, yep, I've got this many students participating in Bridge, 60% are retained in that first semester once they've transitioned. And then the college completion rate, that next field that here says 15%, that's the institution's number.
So, you know, for now, I would say, in the absence of knowing, I think it's unlikely that many colleges would have a number of adult ed students who transition who go on to complete. That's, of course, the ideal number to have. But in the absence of that number, I would say the institution's completion rate might be a good proxy initially. I certainly think that early in a transition program, it's likely that some of the students would be more likely to persist than that, in that you know, the first few students who are transitioning to college out of a large pool of adult education students are likely very, very focused on that goal. But for now, as a proxy, I would say, you know, the college completion rate overall is a good way to go.
Okay, great. And I have tested this, you know, with colleges that have, you know, I think it was Jim who brought up the question of scale. And we acknowledge, I mean, I talked to adult ed leaders who have 500 total students in their program, you know, so their scale, they might be looking at a population of 15, you know, or 20. There are folks who have, you know, a couple thousand, a few thousand adult ed students. So we acknowledge that, you know, the City College example, having an entire population of 30,000 and then being able to engage, you know, between 500 and 1,500 students is a different scale. But I just wanted to point out some of the tools and additional information that we equip you with to help support your local case. And with that, if folks have other comments.
Yeah, if there are any other questions or comments or insights now that you've seen both the investments and returns and thought a little bit about how this might apply in your context, or if you've already tried something similar, or if there's any other questions you might have. So feel free to put any questions in the chat box, or to hit, you can raise your hand, or you can hit *7 and speak up and identify yourself. I do have another question back on the investment side. And I just wonder, as you were putting this together, were there other costs that you talked about potentially being in the calculation, but that you either wasn't really standard enough across programs, or there wasn't data for, and you decided not to? I mean, did anything else come up?
Yeah, sure. So, great question. I would say there are a couple different areas where we had quite a bit of back and forth. The first one that I'll mention is I believe that it's very important to have high-quality professional development and professional support for adult educators. I'm thinking now about Judy's question about ASAP, because one of the things that CUNY does very well is that. And I think that's an investment that's important, but knowing that there are adult ed programs of all different scales and sizes, we decided not to put that in. A second cost on the investment side that I would mention is that the cost of incremental college credits. We put in having 3 credits for free. In practice, and if you think back to the poll question that Mary Kay had, in practice, it's probably the case that not all the college level classes are full. And When Ann was running transition programs several years ago at Truman College, along with the team there, one of the models they used was taking students from adult ed and offering them free classes in classes that weren't yet full. So that's a cost that we included that might not have needed to be included. And then on the support cost in terms of transition specialists, that's one that I expect would really fluctuate quite a bit from place to place. And on the flip side of this free college classes cost that we included, I would think that the support costs oftentimes would be higher than what we've included here. And so, I think it's kind of, it was hard to arrive at a set of numbers that, there were some hard conversations about what we should include and what we shouldn't. Certainly I can imagine cases where someone's costs are much higher in one category, much lower in the other, but we tried to aim for some kind of middle ground here.
The other thing, you make a good point, Samir, about professional development, and early on in the expansion of bridge programs, both working with Samir and Ann Darton in the position of leadership over adult education at city colleges, Women Employed helped develop daily lesson plans, because we said, well, if there's not a line item in the budget that will allow professional development at grand scale, and we also knew just across the state, that professional development is, kind of different levels of accessibility, that we said, how can we build some of that into daily lesson plans? And I know we had Stephanie Summers logged on at some point, I think she's still on the line, to help write lesson plans that are free to anyone across Illinois or the state, and trying to infuse some of those, best practices for facilitating and instruction. And so, just like when you visit the website to download these materials on the Pathways to Careers Network website, the daily lesson plans for healthcare, transportation, distribution, and logistics. I know we've just uploaded early childhood development, I believe, or it's forthcoming. I think you can contact us and access the hospitality bridge. So it's just another point that, as Carrie raised the point about additional costs, we're also trying to help figure out if we can curb some of those costs.
So I think it's really, thanks Samir for pointing out the other investments that were considered, because I do think what is, the tool is really targeted towards college-based adult ed programs, but it really distills and simplifies the most important investments and the most important returns, but that doesn't mean that programs, especially those programs that are working across CBO in college or just within CBOs, couldn't take that as a starting point and add and really consider what other investments they need to include or what other returns they potentially have and what they look like. So I know that that Women Employed field tested this and got a lot of really very positive feedback, but I think it's also, as a starting point, if it doesn't fit perfectly yet, it really is a starting point that a lot of people we didn't have before. So I think that's important to point out. Are there any other questions, *7, or any other questions in the chat box?
Yeah, there was one comment from Lynn Burkett just thanking us for developing the materials and talking about how it's user-friendly. So thank you for that ad. Looks like another one just popped in.
Great. Jim, do you want to hit *7 and ask your question?
Sure. I was just wondering about whether the revenue shown is I don't know the right word. It's the differential between revenue realized through the bridge program and revenue realized through other existing, perhaps less targeted or effective programs, and also whether there's any revenue lost to the college as a result of enrolling students in bridge programs, as compared perhaps to keeping them in an endless cycle of remedial programs.
Yeah. Jim, great question. I think there's a lot of different aspects of this, so let me touch on some of them. In terms of the numbers that are included here, we are talking purely about the revenue realized from students at the college level. So we're not talking about the reimbursements that are generated by students who are in DebEd or adult education programs at the college. The second thing I would say is that if there's one thing that seems pretty clear in the numbers is that keeping students in that endless cycle in DebEd or adult ed doesn't really work, in that there's massive attrition, right? So students either realize that this is going to work for them or it's not. And while there are, of course, the examples of the students who enroll somehow in the same class for 12 years in a row, my experience is always that those students tend to be outliers relative to the vast majority of students who would come in, take a class for a couple semesters, and then either move on or not persist. So
Okay,
yeah, I mean, I don't know if that meshes with your experience.
I think it does, and I didn't mean to suggest that anyone was intentionally just keeping folks in a holding pattern, but I have seen that either folks don't progress or drop out, as you suggest.
Yeah. So I mean, I certainly think, Jim. I mean, it's a great point, and I didn't mean to. I certainly don't think that anyone's doing it intentionally. At the same time, I do think that there's sometimes a little bit of angst in any kind of change, and certainly that's an issue that many colleges have to confront as they think about new models of adult education and DebEd.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And I do think, if people have access, the reason we created this tool was to help make a case. So if you have access as a local administrator on baseline numbers to say, here is the percentage, 100% of students are in my adult ed program, and X% transition to college courses by taking a traditional path, frequently the number 5% is floated around. And so if fundamentally, let's just play that scenario out, you'd have a 5% transition from adult ed to college baseline, then already having data showing that you have bridge students transitioning at a 60% rate, a 70% rate, an 80% rate, and then retaining in college really doubles down on making the case of the effectiveness of this model. And that's why we wanted to, prepare a document that you can use with your local data, your local institutional numbers, and make a case that works for you with your local administrative team.
Great. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So what I'd like to do now is just remind everybody of the website that Mary Kay pointed out earlier in the webinar, and just I want everybody to take note that this is the place to get all the tools and resources. So you can download the brief, the worksheets. I think you can also find here some of the original sort of driving data behind developing and promoting bridge programs. And so this is really meant to be useful whether you're an adult ed practitioner or a college administrator. And please feel free to link this webpage to colleagues and administrators who weren't able to be on the call today. So lastly, we have one final poll. So we are very interested in the results here, and we want to know, so after today's webinar, do you plan to use these materials to make the case for investing in bridge programs in your organization? So yes, maybe, or not right now. We don't let anyone off the hook for these questions.
We're optimists.
We are optimists.
Yep.
Full inclusion of everyone.
We're activists.
Possibility.
We're optimists.
So,
well, and it gives us a chance, when Carrie and I, close out the webinar, we can look at the list of participants and have a better understanding on who we should prioritize our follow-up, with whom we should prioritize our follow-up. And so if you say yes, and you want to reach out to us, or if you want us to reach out to you, I'll close the poll.
okay.
And then I'll put up our contact information, so if we don't get to you fast enough, you can can always
You
contact
can
us.
always contact one of us. So thank you everyone for participating. We had we had nearly 50 people on the webinar today. We had really a great variety of individuals from individual backgrounds and experiences, and thanks for your questions and participation. Thank you, Samir, for all the work that you have done on this issue and this brief, and Mary Kay and Dana, special thanks on the technology. So you will hear from us again about future webinars and future information, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.